This program has been made possible by Weatherby Asset Management. The views and opinions expressed are those of the guest.
We are tuning in to Wealth Psychology at Sylvia Global Media. My name is Emily Bouchard from Wealth Legacy Group, and we're here talking with Dr. Tom Deans, author of Willing Wisdom, and we are talking about wills and why we don't have them and what we can do about it. So our next segment is with Dr. Tom Deans. We're going to be talking about how do you have these conversations. And Tom, could you start us off by talking about your memories, maybe your earliest memory in your childhood of when your family started to talk about wills in a way where you had an understanding of it, and then how it progressed? Because I'd love for you to paint a picture in the viewers' minds of how they might actually be able to do this.
My very first recollection of a family meeting was in Montreal. I was 5 years old. It was 1967, and we went to this old gentleman's club. It was called the MAAA, and it was this oak-paneled room, and we all had on our suits and ties, and there was a group of advisors around, and it was really quite extraordinary just how much transparency there was. There was no kind of excusing us from the room when they got to the numbers. We just kind of grew up in this world where it was all shared. In other words, a kind of a hard-earned understanding that secrets seldom serve families, and so wealth maturity concepts around wealth ingenuity they're learned. They're learned like any other skill.
Yeah.
And I think the inclination, I think, of most people is to hoard the wisdom, or they don't know how to start those conversations.
Yeah.
And of course, the stakes get incredibly high, and they defer those conversations. So they say, well, I can't tell my child that they're going to inherit $5 million because they're only 16. But they don't answer the next question, which is, well, when is the appropriate time? Is it 18? Is it 25? Is it 36? I have met some business owners who won't share their financial information with their children, and the children are in their 50s and 60s.
Oh, yeah. I know, and they might even be working in the business. I know.
Well, exactly, and there's a word to describe that. It's a psychological word. It's called infantilizing. It's where grown adults treat their adult children as infants, and they never let their children grow up, and they never start those conversations about wealth and how wealth was created and what wealth can accomplish.
So how do you, I mean, we could talk all day about the conversation piece. What was the mood when your parents would talk about this? How do you remember, like, when you went to the meeting? Was it like you couldn't wait to get out and it felt really oppressive, or were they smiling and in a good mood? Like, what were your impressions of that conversation?
Well, I'll tell you, I know for certain that some of those meetings were very upbeat, and I know some of them, had concerns. There was always my sense, and I have to share with you, my father and I come from 4 generations of business founders. So we start businesses, we run them, and some of them have been publicly traded. But I have to share with you, Emily, my mother is a psychotherapist. So I grew up in a world of hard numbers and in a world of relational discussions. And I think, to answer your question, I think I've always been exposed to, even in those meetings, I was kind of toggling back and forth between what some people would call the hard and the soft issues. Of course, we know the soft are the hard issues, and the hard ones are typically easier. But that's just what I grew up in. So what I did grow up understanding was that every single business, just like every single family, and certainly every family business, has a beginning, a middle, and end. So much of those meetings, the content was around where that business is in its life cycle. So we've sold 4 businesses. We've never transitioned a business into the hands of the next generation. We've involved them in the employment of those businesses. That's where we kind of cut our teeth. But we never gift our businesses. We gift wealth. We gift a lot of wealth to our children, and we give our children access to our personal and professional networks. We groom them, we ready them for the day in which they'll have access to capital, and they're prepared, and they go off and they start their business. And the chances are that it's going to be very different than the previous business and the one before that and the one before that.
You bring up a good point. I just want to tap in here for a minute, because at Wealth Legacy Group, we're really strong proponents of defining wealth much more broadly than just the dollars in your bank account, or how much assets you have. And it has so much more to do with, are you transferring your wisdom, your intellectual capital? Are you transferring your social capital? Are you transferring your networks and how to design and create really powerful networks? Because that's where true net worth lies. If you lost everything tomorrow, again, who are the 10 people you're going to pick up the phone and talk to? And what kind of relationships do you have around that? And where the financial capital is one facet of it, but it's not the defining facet of it.
And Emily, I think that's excellent, because I think it acknowledges that every family and every individual and every family is different. There are certainly, I know as do I, that I've met inheritors who have inherited $1 million and they've turned it into 50 million. Like, there are some, we want to believe this narrative that everyone who inherits money is going to somehow go off and buy cars and clothes and just consume it. I have to tell you, I am awfully impressed with the generation of what I would consider better educated, more socially attuned generation who will take their inheritance and deploy it in a very different way that pays homage to the way in which the money was created. I continue to be impressed. But what does the media focus on? It focuses on the inheritor who seeks fame and addiction, and it falls apart. That's what we learn, and that becomes the dominant narrative. And I have to say it's quite unfair, particularly for those who have a social conscience and who actually are really committed to perpetuating the family name, not necessarily the family business, but the family name in a responsible way.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you talk about these meetings that your parents were conscious enough and intentional enough to start when you were quite young, and I'm assuming with all of your siblings, is that there's this sense of your mother had the psychological background, the know-it-all in terms of how to create a safe container, to make it so that whatever the concerns are that the kids might have, the questions that the kids might have, are open, are welcomed, are encouraged. And I think a lot of times the people that we work with, they bring us in when a lot of challenges have happened in the family because it hasn't been a safe place to bring forward your questions or your concerns. And especially when those secrets are in place, then there's a sense of, well, I don't know what I'm supposed to know or what I'm not supposed to know, but how am I supposed to look at my future and my estate planning and what I need, what matters most to me, if I can't ask these questions and there's something looming back there that's going to impact my life at some point, but I don't necessarily know when or how much or to what degree I'm going to have say or control over it. So there's a lot at play in not having these conversations. And I think that when people bring us and they look to us for support, it's because they don't have somebody like your mom who knew how to create that space. And maybe even some damage has been done because people, when they've tried to have this conversation, it hasn't gone very well, or there's been repercussions afterwards.
Well, I think you're really bang on, and I think what you identify is that when families can talk and treat families as a kind of as a partnership, that takes some great introspection to relinquish control, because when you're aging and you have the assets, you effectively have control. You're in the position of saying you'll get this and you'll get this and this is when you'll get it and here's how much. It is an imbalanced relationship, and it is the rare individual who kind of relinquishes that authority and control and has the wisdom to do that and to create families of partners that will, as time marches on, we know that the children will play a lead role in the provision of late in life care. We're dying much later, and the way that we're dying is profoundly different. We're not suffering massive heart attacks. We get stents now in our hearts, and we live for another 20 years. But we convalesce for 20 years, and we rely on family for 20 years in ways that we never have before. What kind of families? Ones with deep, open, trusting relationships around the most divisive subject, money, or the family that talk openly and honestly and transition wealth in a way that is respectful and releases potential. That's the guy who's going to get great care. The one that built that kind of family. That's the family that's built to last, not the ones that treats money as a source of control and wraps it in secrets.
Yeah, that's leading a truly rich life. Like, that's the wealth that's around you when you really need it, and it's about the people that are around you. And what have you done in terms of your power and control to further those relationships or to keep them more at a distance and to have less trust and communication. So really important information. And I think our next segment needs to be about this whole concept of consumption for consumption's sake, and also the way in which we identify with what we have that makes it harder for us to be able to speak about how we want it transitioned and what that means to us. I think that you make some really important evocative points in your book about that.
Weatherby Asset Management is dedicated to providing exceptional wealth management services by forming partnerships built on trust, understanding, and thoughtful advice. For more than 20 years, they've been offering objective perspective, personalized planning, and sophisticated investment management to individual investors and families, as well as pension plans, foundations, and endowments. Contact them at www.weatherby.com. Weatherby Asset Management, located in San Francisco and New York City.